Hello, is it working?
Yes. What's up?
Hey, how's it going, Martin?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. Well, always open to hearing the opposite side there, but glad you
Yeah.
decided to come for a chat.
Yeah. I heard that there was a chat dedicated or a Discord dedicated to Cassava, so I thought that was really interesting. Most stocks don't have a Discord, which kind of leads me to believe what I've been kind of talking about all along, which is sort of a cult stock that has no basis in reality. The price has no basis in reality, but reality, the price, whenever a bunch of people want to get together and buy a stock because they have this collective hope, sometimes you get this like bizarre phenomenon where the price goes up a lot more than maybe you would expect.
Yeah, I can agree with that, but that doesn't really change what the company is doing and if the company will be successful. Like,
Let me,
a company can be successful and still have a cult behind it,
yeah,
right?
yeah, no doubt about it. There are a lot of cult stocks like Nvidia and many others. But let me ask you something. Have you done a lot of biotech investing?
Me? No, I have not, to
Okay,
be honest. This is a pure gamble for me. Based
understood.
on my current knowledge and my expertise, I understand that this is definitely not in my wheelhouse, and I don't have my entire net worth in it.
It
But
seems like most people in Cassava are in that same position, where this is like this represents a utility function for shareholders to exercise a gamble. Even Matt Nacktrap, right? The guy's like, I was running circles around him in 5 minutes, like he doesn't understand anything about medicine. And I think he admits that at this point. But he's got a $70 million gamble. Good for him. Hope that's not all of his portfolio, and I'm worried it's actually a pretty large part of his portfolio. Um, but he's a big boy. He'll figure it out if it doesn't work his way.
you don't put any weight on maybe some of the expertise and the experience of the people that are in the company
No,
at
I mean
all.
I know Remy. I met Remy was my big boss in hedge fund industries college roommate. So he went to Oberlin. Nothing wrong with that. My Oberlin's obviously not a medical school or business college, but it's kind of a hippie liberal arts thing. But Remy went to college with Steve, and Steve became one of the biggest hedge fund managers on Wall Street. So, um, anybody can achieve anything if they try hard enough. But I met Remy around 2004. The company was called Pain Therapeutics back then. Remy, Remy, despite not having a degree or whatever, Remy never really tried to become a sort of science person. He was always pretty fast and loose, and I think that's the reason. Like, he had three drug candidates, none of them worked. Ramoxi was this like long acting, hard to abuse oxy. Then he had Ramoxi, basically oxy with low dose naltrexone, and then he had just low dose naltrexone for IBS. All three failed. So like he burned like $500 million in that. So to me,
Hmm.
if you're talking about track records, this guy's maybe got one of the worst. And he comes out with Simiflam, which, to say the least, has got some issues. So, we're going to get the results of these trials soon, but Remy's had a lot of problems. I remember in the IBS study for low dose naltrexone, I talked to a lot of doctors who were in the trial. Back then, it was a little more, I don't know, gray area to do that. Today, most hedge funds would stay away from doing that. But
Right.
back then, I did that, and one of the doctors told me that he thought that the drug was doing really well. And I said, it's a placebo-controlled study. How do you know? And the doctor's like, oh, I just think I know. And I was like, all right, well, we'll see what happens. And I told my boss, and my boss was excited by that. Of course, the trial failed, and I don't know, we lost like $10 million on it. And it was, you know, that's the Remy that I know. But I don't have any chagrin or like bad feelings. He was always a nice guy, super super friendly to me, super nice. I did remember him saying once that running a biotech hedge fund is easy, and I said, why is that? And he said, it's because you just bet on phase three failures, and they always happen. And I thought that was kind of funny, given the current, it's 20 years later. I don't think he ever thought, you know, this situation would happen. But I hope that, I hope that they don't arrest him or indict him. I mean, I think he's a good dude. He's most of Wall Street and the biopharm community kind of consider him to be a bit of a snake oil salesman. Like he's a little too slick. Like he's always kind of like hyperbolic and I don't know, just a little too promotional. He was very promotional around pain therapeutics. A lot of people were short pain therapeutics, and now Cassava is kind of repeating itself. Um, the Dr. Wang stuff is fairly alarming. I mean, it's just not every day you get arrested as a scientist. So, anyway.
But even with if all that is taken into account, like, doesn't it just really come down to, does the drug do what they say it
Yeah.
does? Like,
Yeah. Does it work for Alzheimer's patients?
so isn't all the stuff that you just mentioned kind of a moot point? Like if it works, and even if Dr. Wang gets arrested and Remy is a snake salesman, if the drug works, isn't that all a moot point anyway?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the job of a biotech investor is to figure out if the drug works, right? Um,
Right. So
and
then wouldn't the most important points be some of the results that have come
yeah,
out
well,
of some of the studies?
you asked me a question. You asked me, what do you think about the people at the company? I answered it. So,
Yeah, well, I think that was in response to I guess you brought up the point. First, you brought up the point that stocks usually have a cult following, even though the stock might not be successful. And then my rebuttal was, well, there are a lot of people that are smart and have has experience in companies that had FDA approvals at the company. So
no,
it's not that.
I don't think that's true at all. I mean, there are real biotech companies that have real. They don't have any research lab. They're not doing any serious work. I mean, this is a very small company without real serious footprint. I mean, there's no one I would point to at the company that is like very impressive and has done a lot of stuff or did a lot of stuff at Pfizer or Merck or some other big drug company or started another big biotech that worked out really well. When you build a company, a biotech company, you do look for people like that. And this is a company that's kind of had the same people for a really long time, like Nadav or whatever his name is. It's not really a company that shines with talent, especially now that Remy and his wife resigned. But like I said, I wish the best for them. I don't think simifalam does anything. I think it's this like contrived nonsense. This filament A hypothesis is so absurd. It's insane. Filament A is like this protein that does nothing. That is basically, if you bind it, nothing will happen. Like it doesn't. It's a structural protein, so like it doesn't actually do anything sort of enzymatically or something like that. And typically, I mean, there's very few drugs that work on structural proteins at all. Typically, you want, for example, the amyloid cascade. You have a lot of things going on there that you could pick on. Some people have tried to target amyloid from becoming from monomer to oligomer, for example, for amyloid stacking on itself to elongate and become a fibril. Some people have tried to stop the processing of amyloid through inhibiting an enzyme or a series of enzymes. Some people have tried to increase the, support the brain clearing the amyloid. There's a lot of strategies, but here this filament thing is just kind of nonsensical. And the only person that's ever cared about it is this company. Whereas like the rest of the industry is really excited about Alzheimer's. Everyone wants to make $1 billion or $1 trillion making an Alzheimer's drug, but it has to make sense. And a lot of Wang's work has now been retracted, and there's no other labs that are excited about this or chasing it. Like Merck or Pfizer or J&J or Lilly would be very excited about doing this if they could, if they thought it was real. And that doesn't mean that it's not real. But it's not a good sign. I like to look at first principles, like why is this protein doing anything? It's a cytoskeletal protein that sort of scaffolds the cytoskeleton to the cell membrane. The alpha 7 receptor doesn't do much in Alzheimer's. They've made drugs that block alpha 7 completely, and that doesn't help on Alzheimer's. And they've made drugs that activate alpha 7 and it doesn't help in Alzheimer's. So you have this like very weird hypothesis that somehow filament A interacts with alpha 7, which I'm just not sure makes a lot of sense. One, because I don't think those proteins just like normally interact regardless. There's a lot of suspicion.
Yeah, but we can talk about what we think and what we believe, but I think it really comes down to scientifically if the trials work and if the data shows it'll work.
So I think that to predict whether a trial will work or not, in essence, you have to start with the basic science and build yourself up to the human clinical results. You don't start typically a phase 3 on blind faith. You have some phase 2 data to go on that's hopefully pointing in the right direction, which I contend is not the case here. And then, you make your bet on phase 3, and even the most likely, drugs. For example, I've was involved in a drug called Dimebon, and it had a very successful phase 2, far more successful than Cassava's, and it failed in phase 3. And the reasoning is long and twisted, but the very first exciting drug for Alzheimer's, bepanizumab, the first A-beta antibody, people were really excited about that. And it ended up failing as well, even though it had fairly good phase 2 data. So it's difficult. This is a tough space. It's hard to know what will help cognition, which is a very complex metaphysical kind of emergent dynamic, versus physiological changes like blood pressure or something like that. Cognition is like really hard to get your head around scientifically. And that there's a reason that very few people have ever been able to make an Alzheimer's drug. So just like blindly thinking that this one might work, I think is it's wishful thinking. And again, I made money shorting biotechs my whole life. It's not that new to me. But it's just, you see the same sort of dynamic every time where hope springs eternal. There's always this hope that, look, if it worked and everything I said was dead wrong, I don't know the science, I don't know clinical trials, I don't know any of this stuff, and I'm just wrong, and it has a clear success in phase 3, 4 or 5 point separation from placebo, it's going to be one of the biggest drugs of all time. It could sell 40, 50 billion in revenue. It could be, as big as the company could be as big as Pfizer. But, that's cool. But there's that's exciting if you're along. But the problem is, what is the odds of it happening? And they're basically, in my opinion, pretty much zero. But, I think what people confuse is like, because it's a drug and because it's possible that the drug works, there's some percentage, like probabilistically, this is a really exciting opportunity. And I think that, personally, I just haven't seen that really work in biopharma, and I think that it's maybe not the best way to go, because there's only going to be one answer here. It's a deterministic thing. It's not a probabilistic thing. But people like the probability, so they think it's not deterministic, but it is deterministic. I don't know. That's my 2 cents.
Do you think that isn't there at least a little bit of weight to at least some of the patients in phase 2 either maintaining or improving in cognition, the way that they measured it? Isn't there some weight that kind of gives it a little bit better odds, and maybe it is a gamble still? Like, I agree with you. It's not 100% chance that it's going to be successful, but don't you think that having at least some people improve or maintain cognition levels, isn't that a little bit of a boost to the odds of it being successful? And if it is successful, like you said, the price would go so high that wouldn't that be a good bet just to put something in this?
Yeah. So I just want to be 100% clear what you're asking. So with respect to phase 2 patients, you're talking about kind of the personal anecdotes or the statistical data, or maybe both? So I guess with respect to the statistical data, it's very common in open label studies for there to be performance that's not expected. For example, I was just looking at a drug from another biotech company, and this would be like an example of like a sophisticated biotech company that's got a lot of high quality people and has 2 partnerships with 2 big pharmas like J&J. The company's called Protagonist, and they're in phase 3. The really sophisticated, well-designed drug, and Protagonist is treating psoriasis. So they did the psoriasis study, and in placebo, have it on my screen now. They, let me see if I can share. I don't know if I'm allowed to, but let's see. For protagonist, hopefully you guys can see that. I don't know. Oh, wrong one. Let me see. So for protagonist, what was really surprising is this. They had an 80%, what's called PASI 75, which is 75% clearance of psoriasis, which is pretty damn good. 75% is, really tough to get, and 79% of patients got that. But 9% of placebo did too. And it's really bizarre because how does a person who's covered in psoriasis have a 10% chance of getting mostly clear skin? Just sort of bizarre and odd. And I think in a lot of these trials, you'll see weird things. And the reason we do controlled trials, I'm not trying to be patronizing here, but the reason controlled trials are done is that you need a yardstick to measure against. And you can't take the yardstick from somewhere else. It has to be within the trial. And the trial's controlled for location, like are the sites in the US or not, and they're stratified across all of those things. So you can be confident that the results are real and not just, well, for example, what happens in cancer a lot is if you do your cancer trial at Memorial Sloan Kettering versus Larry's local, oncology clinic, you can imagine that they do a little bit better in Memorial Sloan Kettering. That's not a surprise. And then if you do 10 clinical sites like that, or 3 or something like that, and you don't do any local kind of community hospital sites, your results are probably going to be a little bit better than you think if you're measuring like overall survival or something. Because there's a reason those tertiary centers, those famous doctors, they're getting just a little bit more. If you're normally going to live 6 months with this disease, they might get you 7 or 8 because they know every little trick. They know every. Was I kicked out? I think I might have been kicked out. Well, I can imagine these guys are not happy about my. But you can come to my Discord if you care about Cassava, but that's just sad thing to kick me out. But I'm pretty reasonable. Oh well, rip. My heart is broken. So yeah, that's that, I guess. What's a good song to commemorate this? Yeah, this is basically a poor tax. Yeah, I'm an actual biotech investor who has made a lot of money in biotech. I've started successful biotech companies. I'm more successful than anybody in that chat room. So if they want to bury their heads in the sand, that's fine by me, I guess. I think that these folks like community more than they like money.